Okay.
There it is.
Yeah, there it is. And as I was telling Ben that I really didn't know who he was, and then he was highly recommended by Steve Gray on our board. And then Steve said, "You really got to go see this jazz history of jazz saxophone." And I went, and it's just really, really clever. It's really accurate, super accurate. And I'm a kind of an accuracy fiend myself, so that was really neat. That every style you played it lovingly. It felt like, but it's really fun and really informative. So, and then he has a whole bunch of stuff with groups that he has, Monterey Pop Festival, etc., on YouTube. So you can go find those URLs by putting his name into YouTube. And then the other thing is the next thing I'm going to post are donations to the Jazz Society, and we really want to keep these lectures going, so we depend on people being generous. That's the only way we can continue to support musicians like Ben. So without any further ado, a wonderful musician, educator, saxophone player, band leader, composer, Ben FLOCKS.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, especially on behalf of Jazz Society of Santa Cruz. I remember when I was young, going to some of the jam sessions and cutting my teeth with the local professionals. It was one of the places where I learned how to play this music, and also where I discovered and developed a love for music and a passion that I still have today. So yeah, it feels really great to be here and to see some familiar faces too. It's great to reconnect. I hope everyone here is doing well, considering the times that we're living in. Things have been difficult for many and unusual and confusing in a lot of ways, but I'm really happy to see and hear about all the music that you all have been making together in Santa Cruz, whether digitally, virtually, at a distance. It makes me proud and makes me happy to know that music is still happening and that people are still learning and discovering new things. So that's fantastic, and it's nice that we can have these moments too, where we can share ideas and ask questions and learn from each other. So I think that's the first thing I'll say, is that especially since we have such an intimate group here, I'm happy to answer questions, any questions that you might have about anything I say. So during this lecture, or whatever you want to call it, I'd prefer to call it a discussion. Please ask me something, or if something is confusing, or if you want me to elaborate, I'd be happy to at any point. In addition, I wanted to say that I'm back in California. So we talked about that briefly, but I think I'll start actually by just giving you a quick background about myself. I mentioned that I grew up in Santa Cruz, and I remember going to bocce's and finding some courage to sit in at the Jazz Society jam sessions a few times. Of course, I started going to shows at Kumbwa, and studied with the great Ray Brown at Cabrillo College when I was still in high school. And in addition to a myriad of other resources that I was so lucky to have around Santa Cruz, and with Monterey Jazz and with SF Jazz and Stanford Jazz, I realized that music and playing the saxophone was what I was most passionate about. So I feel really lucky to call myself a professional musician, and to say that I'm still doing it today. Long story short, I spent 11 years living in New York City after leaving Santa Cruz briefly to go to Stockton to study at the Brubeck Institute, where I got to perform with Dave Brubeck a little bit. Then I moved to New York. I finished my undergraduate studies there. I was there for 11 years, and just in September moved to Los Angeles. I wanted to be closer to home. I missed all the tacos here, and I miss the community too. So I feel really happy to be back in California and be close to family and friends out here. I'm primarily a saxophonist. I'm also a teacher. I taught high school jazz combos for 8 or 9 years in New York, and I teach every summer at Stanford Jazz. And I also have been doing a lot of educational outreach in schools around the country, leading interactive performances where I try to inspire large groups of students to learn about jazz and also learn about the history of the United States and discover more about all these heroes that we have within the music. And that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit today, although the focus is improvisation. And I think all of us here are musicians, and doesn't matter what level we're at. If we like to improvise, if we don't like to improvise, that's what we're going to talk about today. And hopefully some of the things that I share will empower you and inspire you to try some new things and maybe think outside the box in your practice routines, in your listening sessions, and in your rehearsals, and whatever your musical situations may be. So I'd like to start with a quick story. Since the focus of today's discussion is improvisation, when I was in junior high school, I went to a school in Santa Cruz called Pacific Collegiate for most of my junior high and for all of high school. And it was a great school. I learned a lot there, and I'm so happy I went there. But the main reason I'm happy I went was because of the music, and because of my music teachers that I had there, and also the peers that I was surrounded by. So I kind of at a whim transferred there and joined the jazz band. And we had a teacher who at the end of every class, every single class, every day, after reading through jazz big band charts primarily, I was playing alto saxophone. I wasn't passionate about it, but I thought it seemed cool because there were some talented musicians there. Many of whom you probably know, the LaBouffe brothers, Hans Bernhardt, Jesse Shane, and I was surrounded by some brilliant minds. But at the end of every class, we would play Louie Louie, and we would jam over, it was like a one-chord jam, and the teacher would run around the jazz big band, and if she pointed at you, you had to take a solo. And I had never improvised before, and I was so scared because I didn't know what to do. I didn't even really know what improvisation was. And I didn't have any background in theory. I hadn't listened to that much jazz or improvised music. And so I was so scared. And I would leave to go to the bathroom. I would get a drink of water and just do whatever I could to be out of her view, out of her sight in those last 5 or 10 minutes of class every day. Eventually, of course, she called on me, and it was inevitable that I had to solo. And I was lucky because I was surrounded by other people who were much more fearless than I was and took risks and tried to solo. And it didn't matter how they sounded. They took that risk and they gave it their all. And once I saw my friends doing it, I realized that I could do it too. And even though there was a learning curve, I discovered that myself and my natural inclinations and tendencies as a musician were associated with my ears. For me, music is all about listening and hearing things and discovering with my ears. And it's never been as much a visual thing, especially when it comes to sheet music and reading music. I was always scared to read music because it was difficult for me. So little did I know that this scary moment discovering improvisation actually would open up so many doors for me as a musician, because I realized that I didn't have to play what was on the page. I realized that I could actually express what was inside myself as a musician and be emotional and a lot of the times, actually, now I feel like I can express myself better and more true on my instrument rather than with my words. So this crucial moment was paramount for me in my career, in my development as a young kid, and learning how to do so many things in life, developing these life skills. I didn't realize how much improvisation would impact that. So I wanted to share that story because I feel like probably in this Zoom call, for me now, I've played hundreds of concerts around the world, and I'm so lucky to have had that opportunity. But there's still moments where I get nervous, or I get scared, or I'm unsure, or I'm just tentative in certain musical situations, and I want everyone to know that that's good, that's okay, that's normal, and I think that's actually healthy, because it shows that whatever you're doing, it's having an impact on you, and in turn, hopefully, you can take those feelings and actually express them through the way that you play your instrument. So that's my little improvisation introduction. I hated it at first, and now it's all I've got. It's really my bread and butter. It's what I love to do most in the world, is improvise, playing music with my friends. And today we're going to talk a little bit about improvisation and some great improvisers. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to listen today, but I'm going to share some tracks and a playlist and some examples that you all can check out after the class if you'd like. And then I'd also, as I mentioned before, really like to talk to you all, answer any questions that you have, and maybe even I'm happy to play a little bit for you. I don't know if we'll get to play together very much today, but I really want to tailor this to your needs and your whatever you all want to hear. I'm here for you this evening. So at this point, I'm going to share my screen, and we're just going to talk about a few different things. So feel free to write things in the chat or raise your hand at any point if you have questions about what I'm going to say. Throughout this, I'm also going to play my saxophone a little bit. So if at any point you can't hear me or you have a question about something, just let me know. Great. Here, so I hope everyone can see that. Let me know if you can't. This is just a little presentation I've put together about improvising, and I'm calling this the one-note solo: techniques, ideas, and materials to help create inspired, impactful improvisation. This is one of my favorite photos ever of a great saxophone player named Big J McNeely in Los Angeles, where I am now, actually, but this photo is from 1951. I've tried to recreate Big J McNeely's passion and just raw energy when I play recently with some of the bands that I perform with, and I don't think I'll ever get to that point, but people like Big J McNeely and some musicians that we're going to talk about have inspired me to take risks and kind of maybe do things in music that I wouldn't have thought I would ever do or get to, and so I wanted to share that picture with you all. Let's see if I can okay. So I think everyone here is familiar with the fundamentals of music. I'm not going to dedicate the talk to this, but for me, and the way that I play as an ear player, you might call it, I'm always listening to music. I spend all day listening. I love listening to music. I love going to concerts. I haven't been able to recently, but listening for me was key in order to help me learn how to improvise. And whenever I listen to music, especially now, I'm more and more aware of the fundamentals of music when I'm listening and also when I'm playing. And I assume we're all familiar with melody, harmony, and rhythm. I have some definitions here for you just in case, but the reason why I'm actually sharing them is because as a saxophonist, and I apologize if this discussion is a little bit saxophone-centric. I hope it's not too much, and I believe that everything that I'm talking about today is applicable for every instrument. And as I said before, the reason why I'm actually sharing these ideas of melody, harmony, and rhythm is because oftentimes, depending on what instrument you play, you get pigeonholed. If I'm a saxophone player, I play the melody, right? That's true. But Rick and I were actually talking a lot about this before the class when we were getting set up today, about these fundamentals and how it's important to understand and be aware of the different functions of different instruments and also the different possibilities that every instrument has, starting with the human voice. But moving forward from that, as a saxophone player, something that I love to do is pretend that I'm a drummer on the saxophone. So when I'm improvising, maybe when you're improvising, you'll be in a situation where you're unsure what to do. How do I improvise? Where do I start? maybe you're looking at the chords, you're thinking about scales. I think these ideas are important when we're speaking about improvisation, but really listening and interacting and expressing yourself on your instrument is paramount and is what's most important. So I'm throwing those scales and chords out the window for now, and we're just going to think about expressing ourselves and finding ideas that can help us be more comfortable when we improvise. And for me, as a saxophone player, I think, Rick, if I didn't play the saxophone, I think I would actually be a drummer because I love rhythm. My favorite musicians play so rhythmically, and I love playing the drums, even though I'm not very accomplished when I play them. For me, rhythm is something that I can latch on to. And if I'm improvising, if I'm in a musical setting where I'm playing and I don't know what the chord is, or I'm sitting in at a jam session, I've never played this song, maybe the harmony or the melody might be confusing for me. That doesn't matter. I can latch on to this idea of rhythm and I can use it to my advantage. So I say that because I want everyone here to think about, no matter what instrument you play, think about how you can function differently using your instrument. Think about how, if you're a drummer, how you can play melodically, or if you're a pianist, how you can play rhythmically. What does that mean to you? What tools are available to you so that you could become a one-man band and you could actually improvise using melody, harmony, and rhythm just by yourself? If you're aware of that idea and you're comfortable in a setting doing that, it's going to make improvising a lot more comfortable for you. I'm going to keep moving here. Let's see. I just wanted to share with you some of my favorite musicians. I think all of these musicians here were improvisers. These are musicians specifically in the jazz world. I have diverse influences in all different kinds of music and all different kinds of art. But a great place to start if we're playing jazz and we're improvising together is to really delve into the history of the music and learn from the people who mastered this art form before us and who have showed us how it works. I encounter a lot of students who want to play and want to improvise, but they don't necessarily listen to jazz. That's okay, because you don't have to play jazz. You don't have to play any kind of music. You don't even have to call it jazz if you don't want to. There are a lot of different names now for every different kind of music, and I like to not think about genres too much, but I really just like to think about it as music and expression. But this group of artists here had a great impact on me as improvisers, some as composers, and almost all of them as innovators and singular voices. They all really were able to develop their craft so much so that they could almost play one note. They could play a one-note solo, and you would know who it was. I can hear Stan Getz play one note. I can hear Art Blakey hit one crash on the cymbals. I can hear Ron Carter play one note on his upright bass, and I know who it is. And that's a testament to those musicians, most of all, because they've developed such unique, distinctive, attractive, approachable, and special sounds. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with almost all of these artists, but these are all artists who, for me specifically, in terms of improvising and composing, had a great impact on my development, and artists who I've listened to over the years and who I think have really showed me the way to improvise just by listening to them play. So they're all here. Feel free. I can share this document too at some point too. I'll put my email in the chat and we can talk later and all of that stuff. But this is a great group of musicians who many of whom I listen to every day to keep me inspired to improvise and learn more things. And I'm always discovering new things from these musicians. Here's a list of some ideas when you're improvising. When I was learning how to improvise um, and learning how to play music, most of my classes were geared towards learning the theory and learning the um, the more technical aspects of the music. And as I mentioned before, that was always a turnoff for me because it was harder for me to understand. Um, let's see. Yeah, definitely. I'll get you a copy. So it was harder for me to understand what was going on if my teacher was putting complex music in front of me or talking about chords with extensions or even just playing scales in certain ways. For me, it was much easier to understand what was going on if I could just listen to the musicians play the music and try to play like they did. As I did that more and more, I discovered a lot about these musicians because I loved the way that they played, but I didn't know that much about them. So some of them I started to research a little bit and I would learn about these musicians and their lives and what led them to um, play the way that they did. Why did Stan Getz have the sound that he did? Why did Louis Armstrong play the way that he did? Um, and that was a really great um, entry point for me to really discover more ideas for how to improvise because I realized that a lot of these musicians were actually playing who they were as human beings. They weren't necessarily thinking about the flat seven or playing the melodic minor, but they were just using their ears to have musical conversations with each other and try to reflect how they felt and about themselves, about their world, and what was going on around them. And I found for me as a musician that I'm most tuned in when I'm really actually trying to express myself in the moment and trying to be as in tune to what's going on around me at any given time. And I learned a lot about that when I was younger, playing in groups in Santa Cruz through Kumba Jazz, with Ray Brown at Cabrillo College, even jamming at the Jazz Society. The musicians were always older than I was, and they were better than I was. And it was a perfect place for me to start to understand a little bit more about the complexities of the music and what these people who my peers, my teachers, what these people were trying to express through their music. So here I have a list of a few different words that I've thought about a lot when it comes to improvisation, and I think they're all incredibly important for us as performing musicians when we're in a setting, um, especially with an audience, but even in a more intimate setting where we're just rehearsing, practicing, or learning music with our friends or our bandmates. So here they are. Drama is one thing. Some of these are interchangeable and have a lot to do with each other. But something that I love about improvising is that it allows you to tell a story through your music. And I couldn't believe that that was possible until I started listening to some of these improvisers and some of these composers like Duke Ellington and when I first heard John Coltrane express himself and really make you, the listener, feel something maybe that you had never felt before with a single note or with a sequence of notes, or maybe with one solo from the once through the form, or maybe 30 times through the form. The solo might last 10 minutes. It doesn't matter. There are so many different ways that you can use this idea of adding drama or telling a story in your improvisation to try to make it more impactful. These are all ideas that we can use to have an impact when we improvise. And so Surprise is another one. Using your emotion. For me, I find that if I reflect the emotion of a song through the way that I improvise, it really helps me. If I'm playing a sad song, if I'm playing a ballad, I want to be true to the composer. I want to maybe learn the words to the song and try to express their vision of it combined with what I have to say. How am I feeling that day? Am I going to be emotional? Am I going to add surprise? Am I feeling vulnerable? Am I able to express and be comfortable with my vulnerability? And that's a big thing when we're improvising. I have so many musician friends who don't want to improvise. They're brilliant musicians, but the one thing that scares them is that vulnerability of improvising and not being sure of what to do. But improvisation is inherently vulnerable because you're ideally digging into a very deep place and expressing yourself when you play. So I really think that vulnerability is key, and that emotion is so important when we're improvising. It's hard though. It's difficult to access those places when we're playing music, and everything has an impact on that. If you're playing alone, maybe it's easier or harder for you to access it. If you're playing in a duo setting, if you're playing on Zoom, obviously that's going to change things incredibly. You can't reach out and hug your friend after you play with them, or you can't feel their energy. But as long as you're aware of that, we can find ways to make it work, and we're doing that right now. Um, a lot of these examples that I'm going to share with you in a playlist too, specifically showcase some of these ideas. One that I think is so important, but also really easy to understand, is this idea of interacting and this idea of call and response. Um, Going way back before jazz was invented, call and response was a part of music and part of humans for many, many years. And I love incorporating call and response into my music and especially into my improvisations. There's a great track on here with Louis Prima where his saxophonist, I think his name is Sam Butera. I'm just kind of getting into those guys, but it's a little bit outside the jazz realm, but the music sounds so good and it feels so good and it draws the audience in, and you can hear everyone on stage is screaming and the audience is loving it. And one way that they're able to achieve that and elicit that sort of energy and that feeling is through simple call and response. And I think probably all of us here are familiar with what that is, but Louis Prima he sings a melody, da 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 da, and then Sam plays it back, da 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 da, on the sax. And there's this moment where it's like, is he going to do it? Is he going to play the right notes? Is it going to be exactly the same? Is he going to switch it up and say something that is maybe an answer to the question? There are so many different opportunities to be creative in a call and response scenario. There's also so many musical examples and compositions where we find call and response actually in the melody of the song. So that's another thing that you can be aware of when you're listening to music, is always looking out for those instances of call and response. And it gets a little bit more subtle or intricate when the musical interaction turns into more of a conversation and a dialogue, and sometimes that dialogue is difficult to achieve when we're improvising, because there's a lot going on when you play with a band. If you're playing in a duo, it's simpler, but if you've got a quartet or a big band, good luck interacting with the rest of the ensemble, right? Because there's so many moving parts. But I guarantee you that this interactivity is so important when we improvise, and for me, it elicits some of the most beautiful moments in music, is when you start to understand and be exposed to the relationships of the people who are making the music together. It's almost like a play or a movie. And so that's something that's had a great impact on me as a musician. Quick side note, uh, while I lived in New York, I play with a band with my good friend. His name's Sammy Miller. He's an incredible drummer and composer, and he does it all. But we went from playing bebop melodies at a dive bar in the Lower East Side when we first started to co-writing full-length musicals that we star in, where we play, we act, we sing, we dance, we wear costumes, there's lights, there's choreography. And this was never something that I anticipated would be a part of my path as a jazz musician or as a saxophonist. But my openness to the idea of improvising and the idea of challenging myself and trying new things allowed me to access these situations and be a part of these new communities that I wasn't familiar with before, that have changed the way that I improvise and changed the way that I think about playing a standard, let alone actually expressing who I am as an artist. So that's just something to be said for, I think, a lot of these ideas kind of being open and being aware of some different ways that different people think about improvising or think about playing music, and especially interacting and improvising together. Accessibility is key too, something I've learned trying to make a career as a musician. I've been lucky to do that. And I love everything that I do and that I make. I also understand that it's important to be aware of who your audience is and to be there for them and to understand what they want, whether you're playing at a club or you're making a record, or even if you're performing with other musicians. It's important to be accessible to them and to play things that they might understand, or eventually maybe play things that they wouldn't understand but they could learn from you, or that would make them feel something. So I think this idea of accessibility, how can we find accessibility, ways to be accessible when we improvise, is really important. And again, I think some of the music that I'm going to share with you all will show you some ways that you can do that. A few more ideas here that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. This idea of tension and release, using our improvisations and our interactions within the music to build up tension, and then finding a way to release that is an extremely effective musical device. And not only is that important and, I think, gratifying for you as the musician, but also for your bandmates and for your audiences to experience those moments where there is that tension. Nobody's sure. It's like a page turner. It's like a cliffhanger. The episode ends or the chapter's over. You're building up to this point. How are you going to do that as a musician? How are you going to get out of it? What are some ways that we can do that? I can't get into too much detail right now because we don't have a lot of time, but I guarantee that some of these tracks that I show you illustrate some musical techniques that you can use. One of my next slides is going to talk about that a little bit, but devices that you can use to develop and release that tension. One of them is the title of the talk, the one-note solo. I have a few solos that I'm going to share with you where, for extended periods of the solo, there's a couple where it actually completely true, and there's a couple where the artist deviates by a note or two. But some of the great solos, the musician just plays one note and they play it over and over again. They repeat it. They use repetition or variation, but they're just playing one note. And I have so many students who come up to me and they don't know how to improvise, and maybe they're playing a 12-bar blues or rhythm changes or a standard form, AABA, which a lot of us, that's what we're dealing with, right? It's like, okay, how do I navigate through these chord changes? How do I go from the 1 chord to the 4 chord to the 5 chord? And that's all important to understand. But something that a lot of people don't know is that you can play one note and actually take an incredibly effective, dramatic, vulnerable, emotive solo by just using one note if you're familiar with the fundamentals of music. If you understand how you can take one simple note and use rhythm to your advantage, then you can make an audience stand up and cheer. If you understand how you can combine a lot of these fundamentals together in distinctive ways, it's going to put you a step ahead. So that's something. Yeah, Rick. Hold on one second. I don't hear you. I don't know if you're muted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, there you are.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was going to say in your list of things where you have melody and harmony and rhythm, I would add timbre to that
Yeah.
because when you, like you say, if you're playing a one note solo really emotively and expressively and emotionally, etc., a lot of times it's like how breathy is your note, how tacky is it, etc. And to me, that's all falls under how you manipulate the overtones of the instrument, not the pitch.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Rick. I mean, that's an incredible device right there. And something that I could do a whole we could talk about for hours is sound, right? I mean, and I think sound is so paramount, so important as musicians is the sound that you're getting out of your horn, out of your drum, out of the piano, out of your voice. That is the first thing that your listener is going to notice about you is how you sound. And um, it's I find that a lot of times musicians are more concerned with the notes that they're playing and not necessarily the sound or the timbre that they're getting out of their instrument. And for me, sound is more important. I always say that you could be the most ripping musician ever and you could play 7 octaves on the saxophone. Um, But if you're playing all of that great stuff with a sound that is not pleasing to me, I'm probably not going to want to listen to you. Now, if you take a solo, or even if you just take out your instrument and you play one note, whether you hit that drum in a certain way, or you pluck that string in a certain way, or you get a certain sound out of that horn with one note, then I'm going to be yours. I'm going to want to listen for days. I would listen to you play that one note because I want to sound like that. So, so this idea of timbre, and especially in these settings, is another thing as improvisers that we really want to be aware of when we're listening. Because if you can glean some of the subtle uh, parts of a musician's sound, it's going to help you sound more like yourself because you're going to take this person's sound, you're going to take this person's sound, and you're going to take another person's sound, and you're going to have your own distinctive influences and group of sounds that you can bring together that makes you sound like yourself. So I don't think it's bad to try to sound like someone. If you find yourself sounding exactly like someone, then I think that's a problem because you're not being true to yourself. But if you use someone's sound who you like and you combine it with someone else's sound that you like, why wouldn't you combine both of those sounds to make a new sound that is more true to you? So that's really great. I appreciate that, Rick. Um, and again, this idea of all of these words here at the bottom, variation, repetition, and using space are techniques that we can use in these situations where maybe we're uncomfortable or maybe we're unsure. We have so many tools at our disposal, and so this is just one way to think about it. But I encourage you all, especially if it works for you, to think about how you can use these tools and these ideas to your advantage, to create a great improvisation, even when going into it you might feel uncomfortable or you might feel unsure about how to tackle it. Um, So let's go to the next slide here. Um, I don't want to be talking too much here. I'm going to play a little saxophone shortly, but I appreciate you bearing with me while I share some of these things that are really important to me, and I hope they make an impact on you. And of course, I want to hear what you have to say about it and hear your questions. Um, I have a playlist. I'm going to share the link in the chat when I'm finished. And it has a bunch of different impactful improvisations for me, more than just on this list. But these are a few that are relevant, I think, to this specific talk and this specific idea of finding new ways to improvise and new inspirations for improvisation. This idea of a one-note solo, I love sharing with my students because I find that it always kind of empowers them to want to improvise, because they realize that they can just use one note and they can still sound really great. And especially if they're playing that one note with a good sound and they're interacting with their ensemble, they step up big time to the next level. So there's a couple tracks. Again, I'm saxophone biased here. So these three solos, I think, are all from saxophone players. Dizzy Gillespie obviously is not a saxophonist, and Louis Prima either, but the musicians on the recordings are the saxophone players in their band. Illinois Jacquet is an incredible sax player. And those are the time markings, but in each of these songs, at least a chorus goes by, I believe, some of them a few bars where the musicians just build it up through tension release into a frenzy by just playing one note and by using their sound and by using a rhythmic device in order to interact with with their band members. And in turn, a lot of these recordings are live. They elicit an incredible reaction from their audience. I also have some other solos of note here which follow a similar pattern. Sonny Rollins is someone who has had a great impact on me as a saxophonist and as a musician. He is the epitome of a rhythmic musician, even though he's a saxophonist. He plays the saxophone with such varied rhythmic pulse, and his ideas are so unexpected, and after you listen to him a few times, even more unexpected, but even more beautiful. And there's two songs, one of which is very well known, his composition called St. Thomas, and there's another recording that he did called Without a Song, which is on one of his records called The Bridge. And on those solos, he begins them both in almost the same way, where he uses one note to anchor his entire improvisation. And you think Sonny Rollins can play all 12 notes, and on some of his recordings he really does, and he's playing a mile a minute. But on these recordings, which have had such an impact on the history of the music, he's oftentimes going to the root of the key, and he's using that in order to anchor and propel his improvisations. And like the one-note solos that I talked about before, it's a way that he can connect with his bandmates on a deeper level, and it's something that everyone can grab onto, which allows a greater ease of expression and creativity on the ensemble. So those are in the playlist. Check those out. Coleman Hawkins, Body and Soul. A lot of you are probably familiar with this recording, but this is one of the first improvisations. Coleman Hawkins, in jazz, and especially with the tenor saxophone, Coleman Hawkins was playing the very well-known melody to Body and Soul, and what he did was he just embellished. He added a few notes and phrases in between the melodic phrases, and in turn helped revolutionize the way that musicians improvised. And he did it in such a tasteful and informed way. It almost sounds like what he's playing is through composed, or it's part of the original melody. And I think that's the goal when we're improvising and playing a song. We don't want it to sound like, okay, we're going to play the melody in, and now I'm going to take 12 bars, 2 choruses. This is my solo. This is your solo. That's good, but but we can take it to a new level where we can find ways to actually improvise within the core and the meaning of the song that we're playing. And so maybe soloing before you play the melody, or only playing the melody at the end, or only at the beginning. There's so many different ways that we can make this music more interesting and more new and more exciting to both us as musicians and also to our listeners. Finally, there's a great pianist named Keith Jarrett, who I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with again. And I put his very well-known recording of the Cologne concert on here because what Keith does now and what he's most known for, arguably most known for, is these improvised concerts. And he's such a brilliant musician that he can sell out Carnegie Hall just making it up. And I actually went to his last concert there, and I can tell you from a listener's perspective that it had a incredibly profound emotional impact on me. And he improvised most of the show and then finished it with a few standards. But by the end of the concert, I couldn't believe what I just heard. And one of the first times he started experimenting in this format was the Cologne concert. So you can check out that recording and hear him actually improvise songs and come up with melodies on the spot. And everyone has their own opinions about Keith, but I really think he's a brilliant musician and worth listening to if that's something you're interested in. Let's see. Finally here, before maybe I play a little something and before we talk together, I just wanted to share these steps that I hope could be beneficial to you all as musicians in your actual practice and time learning how to improvise and practicing improvisation. For me, the single most important thing was playing along with records. And not everyone does this, and not everyone is comfortable with it, and it doesn't work for everyone. But I would say probably, I think a majority of my musical community would say that they did this. And not only that they did this, but that this had a great impact on their ability to learn how to improvise. So I encourage you all to try to play along with records, especially right now when we can't get together necessarily, or even though we're just maybe starting to be able to do that. I spent hours and hours playing along with records in my room when I was in high school, and I wouldn't do my pre-calculus homework, even though I love my pre-calculus teacher to death. But I was really so focused on the music that I would devote as much time to playing my saxophone and listening to all these great records and going to Borders and buying CDs and playing along with records and learning from the musicians playing on the records. So that's something I encourage you all to do. I also included the idea of practicing focused listening. I'm guilty of not doing that as much anymore. I think that's something that has been arguably lost in the new generation, and even someone like me who listens to music all the time and loves it so much, I don't focus as much when I listen to music anymore, and I regret that. And I find that when I do have the headspace and I feel like it's a moment where I can sit down and listen to a record in its entirety, those are the best moments for me, because as a musician, because I learn so much, I put my headphones on and I just close my eyes and fully immerse myself in the record. And you hear things that you haven't heard before. I don't care if it's Kind of Blue that you've listened to 17,000 times. I'm going to hear a new bass line. Maybe I'm going to focus my listening by trying to listen to the bass player, or listening for interactive moments, or specifically listening to the harmonies that Bill Evans might be playing on the piano. I don't care what it is, but if you can direct your listening in focused ways, when you're in these particular settings, it can really help you learn to improvise, because you'll start to immerse some of these things that you hear. You'll start to hear them come out in your playing. Let's see. Before I move on, Rick, Are we okay to go a little bit over past 8? I know if people have to leave, that's okay.
Yeah,
But
yeah, absolutely.
okay. So I won't rush through this, but
It goes quickly, doesn't it?
it sure does.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll see what I can do here, and I want to make sure we can have some questions. But I'm in no rush, so let's just get through this right here. Transcribing is something that everybody advocates for almost. For me, transcribing had a important role in my development as a musician, but it wasn't necessarily. I wouldn't say that I'm a transcriber in the formal sense. It was always too hard for me to listen to an entire solo and write it all down. I had to do that for some assignments in college when I studied music, and I did it, but it took me hours. But what I've always done, and going back to those moments when I played along with records, was I've always taken phrases and little bits and pieces here and there and transcribed those by ear and just incorporated them in my playing. So if I heard Charlie Parker play a phrase that I liked on Yardbird Suite, I would play along with that record, I would learn it verbatim, and then I would play it probably on that same song and find other songs and other similar harmonic settings or musical settings where I could start introducing that piece of vocabulary or language or idea into my playing. I really do think that jazz, especially in this thing, is it's kind of like a language. You really need to listen to it and pick up on phrases and groups of notes and sound and all these things in order to express yourself fluently. Of course, go to concerts. If you're all in Santa Cruz, go to Kumba, go to the Catalyst, go to Moe's Alley. We have a drive up to the city. There's a plethora of incredible places to learn about music in Santa Cruz. So that's really special. And don't just listen, watch, especially if you're watching a pianist and you play piano, see what they do with their body, see how they breathe. Try to incorporate some of these things into your playing. And if you can, go up to them after the show and ask them, hey, how do you do that? Or like, I saw you do this thing. What's going on? Something that I think is really cool and difficult is to give yourself limitations when you're practicing. So forgive me here. I haven't been playing as much saxophone these days as I would like, but I'm finally getting back into it and have some gigs on the calendar. Feels good. I give myself limitations when I practice improvising, and what I mean by that is there's so many different ways that you can do it, and it varies depending on what instrument you play, but something I love to do as a saxophone player is take a solo just using one hand. So there was a chorus on a 12-bar blues, and I didn't use my right hand. There were a bunch of notes that I couldn't play. What I'm doing is limiting myself so that I can be more creative and have access to different things that I normally would not play. It's a very cool exercise to do. If you're a drummer, you could play with your hands. You could play with just one hand. You can limit yourself in terms of actually what you're playing. So you could just play, say, I'm going to rhythmically limit myself and only play certain rhythms. So maybe I'll take a chorus on a blues and I'll try to only play triplets. 1, 2, 1, 2. So that's tricky. That's difficult to do, but you can do it. If you wanted to start limiting yourself in this way, you could only play quarter notes. Eventually, you could try to take an entire chorus playing just eighth notes. So there I cheated a little bit. If you give yourself limitations, you'll find that you can get out of a funk. You can, if you're playing the same stuff or you don't know what to do. I really love to try to limit myself sometimes, and help myself discover a new way to play or a new idea. Even as simple as taking a song that, if you play a blues in B flat every time, try playing it in the key of B. That's gonna be very difficult. Try playing it in E flat. Start slow, but see how playing things that you're used to and that you're comfortable with, see if you can find ways to challenge yourself to do them differently or to add new ideas to them. Something that I learned a lot about this summer, I don't know if Vivian was in that class. I'm studying for a master's in music education at San Jose State right now, and I'm learning a lot about assessment. And that's really difficult for me as a musician, assessing myself, because I hate to listen to myself. And I'm sure some of you can relate, but it's really important. And if you record yourself on the gig or in rehearsal or even when you're practicing, I guarantee it's going to open up a lot of possibilities for you as an improviser, because you're going to discover new things about your playing. You're going to hear, oh, I always sound flat when I play low, or well, I played that song, but I didn't realize I skipped a beat there, or I lost a bar, or maybe you'll hear something positive in your playing. It's important to assess how you play to help yourself grow. So if you listen to yourself enough, you're going to put yourself in a position where you can improve. Now, I talked about this briefly before, but it's a great idea to define influences outside of jazz saxophone. And I mentioned that now I'm singing and I'm helping write musicals, and I'm even learning dance moves. It's insane, but it's really fun, and it's broadened my horizons as a musician. If you can find influences on other instruments, find rhythmic influences if you're a saxophone player, find melodic instruments influences if you're a drummer, and then also looking outside of jazz, or even to visual art, or to dance, or to whatever it may be, to nature, anything that inspires you, a novel or poetry. You can try to incorporate those into your improvising and into your idea of your art. And there's a lot of incredible cross-pollination, different collaboration happening now between different art forms that are really, I think, expanding our ideas of what art is and what we can do as artists. Rick, you got something? No, you great. We'll get to questions in a second, but finally, I just have a couple more ideas here where I think it's important to find the balance. And I mentioned before that I've always been an ear player, and I use my voice and my ears to help me learn how to play. I'll sing things that I hear, and then I'll try to play them. But it's hard for me to want to practice my scales and want to go through more technical etudes or exercises, even though they can be very important. So if you can find a way to make those exercises exciting by incorporating improvisation into them, or just taking a new adding new strategies to your practice routine, I think that can be really important and beneficial, because it's easy to get bogged down and stuff. So I mean, even if you want to watch the baseball game, practice while you're watching the baseball game on mute, or find ways to make these challenging moments in your practice routines more exciting by incorporating musical elements into those moments that excite you and that you love. Um, and the last thing, of course, is that you got to make music with other people. I learned so much from my peers growing up in Santa Cruz. I wouldn't be where I am today if I wasn't surrounded by the community in Santa Cruz. I see my friend Steve Gray's here. It's good to see you, Steve. I
Yeah,
mean,
man.
Steve's been a friend of mine for years. There's so many people in Santa Cruz who have helped me on my path as a musician. And when I was in school, I was so lucky because I had other friends who were my age who were just as passionate about going to Kumba as I was. And that's crazy that there were these. I had friends in eighth grade who listened to the same music that I did, but there's people everywhere who love the same things that you do and that are passionate about the same things that you are. So I really encourage you to reach out to your friends, to talk to your bandmates, to get together when it's safe to do so, and to try to learn musical things and other perspectives that might help you improve your whatever it is, the way you improvise, your ability to be confident on the bandstand. Maybe you learn a new thing about your instrument, or a new song, or an idea for how you could compose, even though you struggle with composing. Whatever it may be, our community is our biggest, our most important asset. And I'll end this talk before we get to
Let's say,
questions by saying that the Jazz Society of Santa Cruz is vital to the community. And I mentioned before that I felt lucky. I still feel lucky to have uh, people here like Josh and Ken and Vivian and Rick, who I'm just meeting, who reached out to me, and Steve. All of you guys. There's a strong community in Santa Cruz, and the Jazz Society really brings this music that we all love to a broader audience. So that being said, it doesn't run itself. So I know everyone here supports the Jazz Society, but um, I, I would appreciate if you continue to do that and continue to go to the jams and continue to give money if you can, whatever you can do to to um, to keep the music playing. That's the only reason why this kid from Santa Cruz now is a musician, because there was music all around me growing up, and the Jazz Society was a big part of that. So please support the Jazz Society and continue to come to meetings like this. Yeah, Rick.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. And also, I wanted to say, do you still have family in Santa Cruz?
I do. Yeah, my parents live in Bonnie Doon. They've been there for I think close to 40 years.
Well, when we get going again, we would really love to hire you to come be a special musician to sit in and as the leader of a jam, and a featured artist, and
I would love that. I would be
come to a
thrilled.
set of your own shit and then and join us. That would be, and we're not super far away from that right now because Capitola is close to changing the things, and this one brewery that we've been at, they're doing socially distanced outdoor concerts, and they have a hell of a lot of space, and they're being very, ethical about it, safe about it. So
Great.
it may be sooner even than we think. So we would really love to honor you and have you come up here and give you a gig when you come to visit your family.
Would be happy to, absolutely would love that.
Yeah. Yeah, so some really thought provoking stuff. I wanted to thank you for your take on it, and it's neat. In a lot of jazz education, you don't hear a lot of the ideas that you put forth today, and they are, and a lot of those things, as you say, they really do make a difference when you hear somebody do a solo, you know. So
Yeah.
the other thing is, are you teaching remotely? And we take lessons from you?
Yeah, absolutely. I teach on Zoom. I teach remotely. I'm in Los Angeles currently, but I will be spending a considerable amount of time in Santa Cruz now that I'm back on the West Coast. So, um, yeah, I love to teach. I'm going to be teaching through Stanford Jazz Workshops. They're at least doing it virtually this year, this summer, and hopefully some in person teaching. So I've been there every year since I was a camper, when I started there in I think 2004, and I'm hoping to start my private studio up here in Los Angeles now that I'm getting settled here. So yeah, I love to teach, and I'm learning more about teaching too through my pursuit of the master's degree. So,
Yeah,
uh,
good luck with that. That's fantastic.
thanks, Rick.
The future looks bright because you're
Thanks.
doing what you're doing. Yeah.